United by friendship and their passion for preserving the past, a group of women began collaborating in lockdown. We're now going to talk to them about their joint endeavours. And it's a project called A Few Forgotten Women. It was launched earlier this month. So today we're going to welcome Janet Few, Anne Simcock, Helen Shields, Mandy Geary, and Margaret Roberts. Now, I've been exploring your website, and it is always great to see what happens when an enthusiastic and dedicated bunch of genealogists get together and work on a project. But this is something quite poignant and quite different as well, isn't it? So I don't know, Janet, should we kick off with you? What was it that made you realise that there was a need for this project, that you really felt that you had to go for it and make it happen, the A Few Forgotten Women project?
Well, we've been working together for a couple of years, and we've been working on things like telling the stories of our own grandmothers. We'd told the stories of our own lives. And I was already doing a talk called Forgotten Women. And we kept coming across these ladies who seemed a little bit neglected, and no one was taking an interest in them, both our own families and just other people's, really. And we thought it was important that their stories should be told, and it's always fun doing things together. So we decided we'd work on this as a group.
Yeah, and the hard thing about it is, they are historically like the unvoiced people, so it must be particularly hard to find these stories. So I don't know, Helen, are you able to shed any light on how these stories had the kind of light shone on them? How do you go from them being the unvoiced of the past to how do they materialize?
I think we find them in all sorts of different ways. So some of us have found them through our one place study or one name study. The one that, because I haven't actually done a one of my own, but we've actually worked together on some of them. One of them was Anne Palmer, which Janet Few had identified and started on. And then we actually sat on Zoom and worked together to try and find some more details. And I was really pleased because I was able to find the name of the baby in a different newspaper article. But together we kind of pieced all the different bits together. And it's just people we come across so that really have been forgotten, if you like. So most of them are not really mad or bad. They're just neglected and perhaps haven't got some family historian writing up their stories.
So from the sound of what you said, some of it they've come from a family history angle and some from a local history angle. There's lots of different ways in that these people kind of come to the forefront, which is good that they're not lost forever, isn't it? So I think probably working as a group, that must have been quite exciting. You must have gradually had more and more conversations where you realise that there are lots of themes of why somebody may have been omitted from the past. So Mandy, do you want to tell us anything about the themes that you did identify?
Yeah, we say it's great working as a team, and we all pick up on little bits. And often after we Zoom, we've got a little Facebook group, and we all sort of go, "Oh, we've had a look further, and we've found this, and we've found that." And there's always great excitement when everyone finds something new. But the themes that we look at have been quite widespread, and they vary from the obvious things like illegitimacy and poverty and alcoholism, to things like mental health and criminality. We've got quite a few sort of criminality, murder, no descendants. It can vary quite wildly. Some fit in multiple categories. But I think the thing is with all these women is, women so often are not included in records. And, even going back to, I remember mentioning to Janet, I'd been looking at some parish registers, and they were only early 1800s, but all the women and children were referred to as the good wife or the wife of, or the widow of, or the child of. There was no names. And I think that was the thing that we're all jointly come together in, is that we wanted to remember them, because so often you don't find the records that cover them. It's all in the man's name. So that's, hence the Forgotten Women. And we feel it's good to sort of put their stories over.
So I mean, it's tough stuff as well, because you identified those themes, but they would have been tough lives to live. And then also when it comes to covering them in our family history, that's when it's our own family history, we kind of got ownership of it, and we do tend to just tell those stories in I think we're a pretty unjudgmental bunch nowadays. Like we want to include the stories, but if you're including other people's stories, then suddenly you may feel that you've got a bit more of a kind of moral dilemma, because what happens if a descendant sees it? So I don't know, Anne, like, do you want to maybe mention, like, how do you go about thinking, how are we going to tell her story in a way that isn't going to distress descendants, or how do you address these things? What sort of things do you put in place?
I think the important thing is that we have to remember that when we're researching these ladies, they don't live in our time. They lived in a time which we do not really know about. We can look it up in books and so forth, but we have to remember the historical, legal, economic context to which these ladies fit. A lot of the time, they were restricted. If they got married, they were restricted by what they could do, what they could leave, what they could inherit. And also, they were restricted in their occupations. They were not allowed into occupations because they hadn't got the education, and they weren't allowed to get the education to go into those occupations. So all these aspects to a woman's life have to be taken into account. Now, when we tell the stories, if we just say, Mary Ann did this, Mary Ann did that, it becomes very impersonal. But when we tell it, we have to remember that they were real people. And we've got to think about how we address their story and make it as sympathetic as possible. And I think we've tried to do that with all our stories, to, even if an ancestor appeared that we haven't been able to trace, when they read our stories, I hope that they will think, well, they found our ancestor and they've been very sympathetic and told her story kindly. I am in touch with a descendant of one of my ladies, and it was quite a difficult situation. My great-grandmother ran off with her husband, and I've been very worried about getting in touch with her, because I thought, well, she's not going to like me. But it actually turned out, when I got in touch with it, she was thrilled to bits, because we were able to combine the stories that we had and enlarge the story. And she was thrilled that her ancestor's story was going on our site. And in the end, we'd finished the story. Janet had got it ready to put on. And the lady came back to me and said, I found some more information here, some more information. And we were able to add an appendix to her story. And I think there might be even more to that story, because I'm working with Eliza's descendant to make the story more interesting.
And that's always going to be interesting to add more to the story, because then,
of course,
finding out why they ended up in the difficult circumstances perhaps that they did. I don't know, Janet, I mean, I was really struck when I have been like rummaging around on your website, like the lengths you have gone to kind of say, if you are a descendant and you don't want the story up, so you've kind of put lots of practical steps in place to make it make the stories be told in a kind of safe and careful way. Do you want to kind of share your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think so. I think it's important that we tell the stories without judgment. And if there are obvious descendants, then we've contacted them and asked them. I mean, clearly, well, Helen mentioned the Anne Palmer case, which was a lady who died in the 1820s and had numerous children and probably has numerous descendants. And there's no obvious descendants. We look at the online trees and see if anyone has got her as an obvious direct ancestor. But we can't forward trace every single one in a case like that when you've got over 200 years to move forward. If we were looking at someone who died in the 1920s, then obviously we'd be much more careful about trying to trace descendants, and maybe a bit more careful about whose stories we told and whether we knew we were the only ones with a vested interest in that story, because they're not just, even if they're our own ancestors, often they're not just ours, they might be the ancestors of our siblings or our cousins and so on as well, who might not feel like we do about telling their story to the world.
I mean, it's good, but it's kind of a real thorny centre of everything that we do, isn't it? Because we're trying, on the whole, we're not trying to set the cat amongst the pigeons. We're just genuinely trying to research and take the story where the research leads it. And so we haven't got an agenda when we're trying to tell a story. The evidence then makes the story take us where it goes. But Margaret, I don't know whether you wanted to add any thoughts on this as well, because it really is a kind of important bit of what you're trying to do, isn't it? Trying to tread that path.
Yes, it is. It's very difficult. My particular story that's on there at the moment is of a lady who, in her time, she was well known, but she died in obscurity after being part of a sporting family that all the success was seemingly down to the men. But without the women in that family, the business, which was a family business, wouldn't be able to run. And that's quite a lot of what happens in Victorian and Edwardian family businesses, is that the women were the backbone of that business, but they're very unsung. And businesses wouldn't be able to run without the women. But as we all know from censuses, you're just a farmer's wife, a shoemaker's wife, whatever. But you're a lot more than that. And quite often, and this particular story of mine, she goes off to America, where she dies quite young and leaves children. And although she's been very well known, she just is totally forgotten. And trying to find her, and because I've been in contact with her great granddaughter, they've lost a bit of the story as well. And just you have to, like Anne said, you have to tread carefully. You have to realise what sort of life these women lived in and how they lived, and you do really have to be very careful how you tread. Not tread on eggshells, do we, ladies? We don't tread on eggshells as such, but just lightly, I think is probably a better way of putting it.
Yeah, and just so it's respect for the people who've gone before us who were researching, and then respect for their descendants, because I think it was Janet who said that you don't know, even amongst our own close family, we all have very different reactions to the same stories, and some of us feel a lot of compassion for somebody, and then someone else might feel a bit more, they don't want them mentioned. And I know in my family, everyone has different loyalties to different nationalities in the family, and it's a very mixed bag. People don't have a single take on family history. So, I mean, we've talked very generally about the stories, and I can't imagine how many hundreds of hours you've all put into bringing it all together. But has anyone got a story that they particularly want to share, or a moment, when you're researching someone and they just kind of capture your heart, don't they? And you've got to find out about them. Has anybody? Anne, would you like to say?
Well, the story that is closest to my heart, I think, is the first one that I did, and it didn't start off as a forgotten lady. It started off that I was trying to help my cousin find her paternal grandparents. In 2010, she discovered that her dad was adopted. And it was a big shock because her supposed grandparents, she'd lived with them, and they were all very close. But her dad was adopted, she found out. She had his birth certificate. So me being the family historian in the family, I sort of said, oh, we've got the birth certificate. Yeah, we'll find her straight away. 18 months later, I was no closer, and 26 Christina Lawrence's piled up in the files. But no, anyway, I won a DNA test, and I gave it to Susan, my cousin, and she duly did the spitting into the tube, and we sent it up and we waited, and then the results came back and nothing seemed really very good. And then all of a sudden I noticed that there was one quite high match, and so I said, oh look, we've got this one. I said, it's got a private tree, oh dear. Anyway, we constructed a very careful email to the person, and because obviously Susan's dad being adopted, illegitimacy would be involved. And so we were very lucky, and I say this, we were lucky. The person replied and allowed us to see the tree. We looked, we can't say anything. Then one night I got a late night phone call from Susan saying, read that foreign name, it looks like Lawrence. If you say it quickly, it sounds like, I said, oh yes, so it does. And from then on, we were able to discover that the lady in question was the daughter of a German immigrant. And of course, this is now coming up to the First World War. And all the family were connected to the German connection. And it was so sad. I got so involved with finding this lady and the story that went on through the war. And of course, she became pregnant and she had Susan's dad. And I lost sight of her till I didn't lose sight. I lost sight of her for 30 years until 1930-ish. And in the 1921 census, she was actually living with the midwife, which was a big surprise. Anyway, I lose her until 1931, where she's a housekeeper in a boarding house in Blackpool, and she's still there at her death in 1964. But there wasn't even an informant on the death certificate. It was the undertaker who arranged the funeral. And so one weekend, we'd been up to the Lake District to see our son. And on the way back, we called at Blackpool and we went to the cemetery, and I took photographs of where her ashes were buried and the houses where she'd been. And I sent them to Susan, and Susan was absolutely overjoyed. But to me, she was a forgotten woman, because she's seen all the records and all the research. She never seemed to have anybody with her at all. And I just got so very close to her, even though she's my cousin's grandmother, not mine.
It's so sad, Anna. Just that one story that kind of sums up probably so many people's lives. You know, I'm imagining she's not going to, well, you can't be that old when you have a baby, because you can't have a baby when you're that old, but so she's going to be relatively young, and then it's had an impact possibly on the rest of her life, the isolation that she's lived in. So it's, really,
a
really
lot
sad
of
stuff.
questions that still remain to be answered. Why didn't the rest of the family after the war look after her? I don't know, but I could get in touch again with the person whose tree it was, but they're not very forthcoming, and I don't want to push it. I don't want to upset people. So we've got the story that we want. Christine is now in her place where she should be. She's a grandma, a great grandma, and a great great grandma in somebody's tree, in somebody's life. So that's what's important. We've put her into a life. Yeah.
Well, it's good work you're all doing. It's very emotional. I think you've got to be writing a book at some point, haven't you? But what other things, like, I don't know, Margaret, so you kind of set up the website. There's an awful lot of work which should have gone in to get it this far. So this can't be the end. What's next?
I think we're just seeing how where the website goes, I think, and also what other stories people from outside the group have got as well. So and you never know, we may even get someone who's telling one of the stories that we're looking at in in some way that we can link up with people that might have just fortuitously might have the same relation, and they're struggling to find any information the same as we are. So that would be quite a good way to go forward. I think, Janet, do you think that that's possibly what we're looking at?
I hope so. I have had offers of guest stories from several people, and we're waiting to see if they fit the remit, and we'll put them up in due course, hopefully. But we've started to add some contextual stuff on the website. So there's a timeline and there's a bibliography, and I've been adding to that, and that's a nightmare because suddenly my book buying budget is completely, but it's another good book. Oh, that sounds really good. And possibly we might even look at a few articles on some of the subjects that we cover in future as well. And one of the things we did before we started this was look at forgotten heirlooms, the sorts of things that you find in a charity shop that we all cringe when we see these flog it type programs on television, and why are they selling daddy's medals, so that kind of thing. So there may even one day be a forgotten heirlooms section to the website as well, where we tell the story of the items that we've discovered.
You did actually get a contact, didn't you, Janet, from one of the stories, who knew some ancestors of one of the ladies from a one-place study rather than from the personal point of view.
Yes. So we've already, we've only been out there for, what is it, a week and a day or something, and we're already getting contacts, and people have been really kind about telling other people about us, which I think is important. That the more people that get a chance to look at the website, the bigger it can grow and the quicker it can grow, because we all have other lives, strangely. We can't devote every waking minute to this, so which is why it's great that it's a collaborative effort. And of course there are members of our group who aren't on this call today who are making a valuable contribution as well, so it isn't just us.
That's great. So if people would like to explore the website, then it's afewforgottenwomen.wixsite.com, isn't it? And then it sounds as though for the moment you've got quite a lot of submissions, but potentially people could submit in an idea, and you, as you say, you can see whether it fits the kind of research goals and project goals that you have. But otherwise, even if people aren't going to have their story published on your website, it's something that we can all look to kind of redress in our own family histories, isn't it? And tell the female side of the story more, because even now it's still, just by nature of the paper trail, it's not something we have so much coverage on, I suspect, in all of our family trees.
No, if we can encourage other people to tell their own stories, whether they appear on our website or anywhere, I think that's all to the good. And you have to put a /AFFW on the end of the web link. I have no idea why. It wasn't our idea, but that's the website name that we've been given. So
no problem, we'll add the link below the video. Okay, well, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, and good luck with all your further research as well, and
Thank you.
for making sure this valuable side of our family histories doesn't get overlooked and forgotten.